All right, I am here with Brian Will, serial entrepreneur, the author of The Dropout Multi-Millionaire, which I love the title of that. Appreciate you joining me on the show.
Greg, I appreciate you having me. This will be fun.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think there's so much ground to cover. We were talking before we hit the record button, and there's a lot of things I want to dive into. But one of the first things I saw in your bio as I was just reading through it is you are a self-proclaimed adrenaline junkie. I know you've done a lot of traveling. I'd love to
Yep.
hear some of the different things you've done. What does that mean to be an adrenaline junkie?
Well, after I sold my two companies in '06 and '08, I decided to do what I called it chasing your passions. It's doing everything everybody says they're going to do someday, but they actually never do. And
Yeah,
so I went on a journey to actually do all those things. Right. So I became a pilot. I became a dive master. I climbed some mountains. I took my kids to China. I walked the Great Wall for 2 days. I've run with the bulls in Pamplona, Spain. I've done a safari in South Africa. I've taken a helicopter tour through Stellenbosch. My goal is, and that's when I started doing triathlons, right? To
yeah.
push myself past what I thought I could physically do, just to say that I did it. So I ran my first marathon when I was 51. That almost killed me, but it's always about chasing those passions, doing those things, no matter what they are and how scary they are. Like I'm going to space in 2025. So
Really?
it's called Space Perspective. It's not one of the rockets, but it's actually, if you're familiar with our recent balloon issues and the government
Yeah,
shooting them down, we're taking a high altitude balloon to 100,000 feet
I love that.
for
That
2 hours up,
sounds
two
so
hours
much.
across, and 2 hours splashdown. And you get picked up by and this capsule's cool, man. It's got Wi-Fi. You can stream video from up there. You can talk on your phone. So it's just about doing things that give you a thrill.
I love that. Well, first of all, I think maybe, being a child of the Challenger disaster, there's something about like, strapping myself to the back of a rocket and launching
Yep.
into space. You're starting to see more of this like space tourism come about, but it just
Mm-hmm.
seems like completely frightening. But like, I love the idea of the balloon. The balloon
Yes, much
seems so much
safer.
more accessible. Yeah.
You don't have 1 billion pounds of thrust and a whole bunch of liquid nitrogen behind you that could blow up and kill you.
Yeah. So, it's funny. As you were talking about that, the running the bulls and all the different types of things that you were doing, it's like, and it's probably pre like real social media, but it seems like that would have been an unbelievable social channel, just to kind of like
Yeah,
follow your journey through these different adventures.
there was no real social media back then. This is late,
Yeah.
a now thing, I guess we'll call it.
Yeah. So, well, I definitely want to get into your entrepreneurial journey because you truly are someone who's walked the walk and you lived it. One of the things that kind of caught my eye that I thought was interesting is your entrepreneur started with a landscaping company in what, you're 20 years old, and that's kind of how you got started.
Yeah, I was a child of an abusive home, got failed out of high school my junior year, managed to graduate with a 1.2 GPA, got kicked out of the house, didn't have a place to go, joined the military because I didn't have any other choice, got off active duty, tried to get a job, couldn't. I kept getting fired from jobs. Even I jokingly say, if anybody who's ever worked in the restaurant industry, I was a waiter and I worked a double shift, 12 hours, and I owed them $6 at the end of the day. And the owner of the business says, I think you need to find a new career.
Yeah.
So I didn't know what to do. I didn't have an education or any discernible job skills, but I figured anybody could mow grass and dig a hole and stick a bush in it. And
Yeah.
literally that's what I did. So I started a little landscaping company. 7 years late, 10 years later, we had 7 franchises around the Atlanta area. Company's
Yeah.
booming, doing really well. And then the entire thing collapsed. As I like to say,
Interesting.
we did really good until we didn't.
Yeah.
And I learned some of my biggest business lessons in that first collapse that have carried with me through the rest of my life. So,
What led to the collapse?
two things. So, first of all, I started a franchise company. And one of the things I've learned about franchising now is unless you're going to blow up a franchise, it's a bad idea.
Yeah.
Because if you're a small franchisor, and in my case, I had 7 franchisees, they really control you more than you control them. And if you
Yeah.
think your contract is going to control their actions or what they do, you're crazy because they know they can get together and gang up on you. So I had a problem with one of my franchisees. It turned into two, which turned into 3 people because they decided to sue me
Hmm.
because they figured out they didn't have to pay me. And at that point, you're so small, you can't fight it. And so that was the first thing that happened. We were doing a majority of the work for these large commercial contractors building apartment complexes at the time. And this company that we worked for, and 90% of our revenue came from one source. Super dangerous in any business. They hired a new VP of construction and he fired us and hired his son. Well, when they fired us, they withheld $150,000 of our money.
Yeah.
I, in the meantime, as a new, I'm making a little bit of money guy, maxed out my credit, my mortgage, 3 cars, a motorcycle, a second house. And when they withheld the money, I couldn't pay my bills.
Yeah.
I had no money set aside. I had no savings. I had no safety net. I got crushed by my biggest supplier, and my franchisees all sued me at the same time. And my entire world collapsed around me at 29 years old. So that was my first failure. And I learned a lot.
It's amazing how much you can learn from failure. It's interesting. I was having this conversation the other day with, so we were doing a remodel. We finished the remodel, and our general contractor was over at our house, and we're talking, and he knows I'm an entrepreneur and involved in all these different businesses, and he's a New Zealander. He's from New Zealand.
Mm-hmm.
He came out here, maybe 10 years ago, and started his contracting business, and obviously pretty successful at this point. And his point was the way the US culture is structured is there's actually not a lot of entrepreneurship. And I know the numbers kind of paint a different picture, but his whole point was, because of the way healthcare is tied into, people's jobs, and, people kind of want job security. It's like, hey, why, risk all this and start a company from the ground up when I can just get a salary, and all
Mm-hmm.
these different types of things. A lot of Americans in general, he's generalizing here, he sees are more comfortable working for other companies. And he said, what you see is a lot of the entrepreneurship comes from people who don't have other choices. So you see
Right.
people like himself who came from another country. He comes here, wasn't necessarily educated in the traditional sense, and his only choice was really to start his own company. And it's interesting because you kind of painted a similar picture to yourself, right? Your entrepreneurial journey started not necessarily because you were like, hey, I want to work for myself and I want to do this on my own. Like, if at the time IBM came in and offered you a 6-figure job, you very well may have just gone corporate, but it was like
Without question.
you didn't have the choice, right? It was almost entrepreneurship by necessity.
Yeah, IBM wasn't going to say, man, we looked at your 1.2 GPA in high school and we really think you got a future here.
Yeah. So who are you seeing? Like when I mean, you do a lot of coaching. You're obviously you're very much a expert in starting companies, and it's not just simply like you've studied and written books. Like the proof's in the pudding. You've done it. You've been successful. You've had your failures. When you're working with people, like what are the traits, the commonalities between entrepreneurs that you see?
I like to say that entrepreneurs' biggest trait is they have a giant ego, right? So we're
Interesting.
drivers, we're red, we have A-type personalities, and we have an ego that goes along with that. Unfortunately, sometimes it's an undeserved, unearned ego, but we still have them. And one of the traits we find is that that's the biggest thing that holds entrepreneurs back, right? It's that ego that doesn't allow them to do what I do tell them to do, which is the very first thing you should do when you're going to start a business. If you've never had success in business before, is you need to go get a coach or a mentor who has been
Mm,
there, done that, is going to tell you that's a mistake, that's a mistake. They're going to flatten the learning curve and accelerate your business from a growth and profit standpoint. But a lot of entrepreneurs are too egotistical to take advice from somebody else. And it blows my mind. And the example I always use is Apple Computer is run by a guy named Tim Cook, right?
yep.
Tim Cook's running the biggest company on planet Earth. He's got to be like one of the smartest people out there. And yet Tim Cook has a board of directors, and the board of directors come in every quarter and they look at all the problems and they say, hey, Tim, based on all of our experience, and by the way, none of them are in the computer phone business.
Yeah.
It's chemicals, it's higher education, it's Al Gore, and they say, based on our collaborative combined experience, we think you should make these types of decisions.
Yeah.
And Tim Cooks takes their advice and he goes and does it, right? If Tim Cook needs people to help him make decisions, what makes you as a young entrepreneur think you're going to do it all by yourself?
That's right.
Right. So the first thing is you got to find somebody to help you, or you're going to fall into, you will be a statistic. The 70% that fail, you're going to be one of them. If you don't, if you got to get that, check that ego, man.
Yeah, I know. I couldn't agree more. One of the core tenets of what I've kind of coined is the entrepreneur mentality, the athlete entrepreneur mentality is coachability. And
Mm-hmm.
I had this conversation with somebody the other day, and I was going to write a whole blog post on it. But like, Tom Brady, like, who is, arguably the greatest of all
As a
time,
coach.
as a coach. And not only
Yeah.
does he have a coach, Monday morning, after their game, he sits in a room with that coach that sits there and will literally pick apart every single play Tom
Yes.
Brady did and tell him every mistake that he's made. And
Yes.
it's like, and he's Tom Brady, right? Like, so,
Yeah.
I think there's people out there that, and it's the nature of the beast, right? Like, you're an entrepreneur, so you start a company, you get a little bit of success, maybe you got some employees, and you have to like posture, right? Like, there's this
Hmm.
posturing that goes along with that role where, well, I'm the boss, so I have to have all the answers.
Right.
I have to be the smartest guy in the room at all the time. So,
Yes.
I think your point is well taken. Is you got to check that ego at the door, and you got to be willing to listen to other people and take outside advice, and make yourself vulnerable in some ways, right?
Yeah.
Because coaching, is sometimes can come off as criticism, but I think you're right. It's absolutely one of the most
You
successful
remember, you
qualities.
remember Jack Welch,
Of course, yeah, GE,
CEO of GE, right? Jack is famous. If you read his bios or things people write about him, Jack was famous for asking questions, not telling people what to do.
right?
In fact, I read articles from friends of his, and they said Jack would come over to dinner and everybody wouldn't talk to Jack about business. And he would sit there and ask them questions all night long and not say a damn thing.
Yeah,
And it's like, well, Jack won't talk to us. Well, Jack's asking questions.
that's right.
And because of that, one of the most successful CEOs out there. Jack said, I don't want to talk to my C-suite. I want to go down into the organization and talk to people and ask them, find out what's going on. That's where I'm going to get the real deal, the real story.
Yeah, you're going to get the real story, and then when you're asking questions, especially if you're smart with the way you ask questions, and your leadership team starts to realize what needs to be done by the answers or by the lack of answers in some ways, and now all of a sudden the direction or the changes that need to be made kind of become something that are developed together, right? It isn't me
Mm-hmm.
telling you to do something necessarily as much as it's like, hey, we kind of solved this problem together. It's easier to get buy-in. There's more likely that there's a
Yep.
feeling of alignment, and you feel like
Yep.
you're part of something. You're not just being directed by somebody else, right?
You're exactly right. Exactly right.
Yeah. So, all right, you really, like, the real success started with tech, right? Like, I mean, you were like a real early adopter in in
Well,
the internet days, or
it's an interesting story. The internet was kicking in around 99. So around 97, went to work for an insurance agency after my landscaping company collapsed, only because I didn't know what else to do. And turned out I was really good at sales,
yeah,
and I didn't know that. And so as I started to develop this agency that I went out on my own, started to develop an agency. And back then we had to like talk to a person on the phone, go out and see them, pitch them an insurance policy, get them to sign, get a check, come back, file the paperwork. And I did this for a little while, but I've always called myself ambitiously lazy,
hmm,
meaning I'm willing to do a lot of work if I can not do a lot of work later. Right.
yeah,
So at one point I said, every time I leave the house and go meet somebody, I'm not home. I'm not answering the phone. I'm not talking to people. I need to hire somebody to go pick up these applications. So that's what I started doing. I paid this guy, Andy, to go do that work so I could stay in the business. And then after a little while, I said, if I could get rid of Andy, I could make even more money because I'm paying him $100 every time he leaves the house. So
sure,
I struck a deal with an insurance carrier to do fax signatures, which was new back in 1999. And so they allowed me to do it. And because they allowed me to do that, that meant I could stay home, sit in my desk or in my office and sell on the phone and do paperwork virtually.
yeah,
And we ended up building the second largest agency in the country for Assurant back then. It was called Fortis. And suddenly the internet boom popped up, right? And all of a sudden these people wanted to sell insurance online. And I was the only guy in the country that had a deal with a carrier that allowed them to go sell product without seeing a client. So I got bought just like that. Well, now I'm in this venture capital world. My eyes are being opened, right? I was a landscaper 3 years ago. And we decided that selling product to the consumer directly was the wrong business model. And I went to our CTO and I said, let's create a SaaS model,
yeah,
sales as a service. We'll build the software, sell it to carriers, and then the carriers can use their current agent force to enroll product with it. And we can charge every application. So we went out and pitched it to 3 carriers, sold $6 million worth of software in 6 weeks,
amazing, yeah,
because it was new, it was exciting. It was the internet, right? And all of a sudden we've created a company. That one went public, by the way. It's called Connecture today. And now it's the backbone of Medicare, Medicare.com, and 1-800-Medicare. Well, then I was like, holy cow, let's do something again. So we started another company. This one was selling direct to the consumer again, but we had developed systems and this whole direct to consumer thing. We were doing online lead generation, started another online lead generation company. Well, then a private equity group came in and they said, holy cow, you guys are killing it in the online lead gen space. We want to buy you and roll you up. So we did an $80 million exit on a private equity deal, 3 years from the day we started it. There's many stories inside that. And then the insurance deal we had, which was being fed by the internet deal, a venture capital firm out of Silicon Valley came in and said, we want to buy you and combine you. And they ended up buying, it's called getinsured.com today.
Yeah.
And now they're I think they're the largest state exchange-based ACA platform. So in like a dozen states, if you buy health insurance, period, you're buying it off of that platform. It's the only place you can get it.
Yeah.
So now I've done 3 exits, venture capital, and private equity. And suddenly the world thinks that you're a genius if you've done exits, by the way.
That's right.
I used to laugh like I was mowing your grass 5 years ago and you didn't care what I said. Now I'm standing in the boardroom talking to a CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company, telling him what's wrong with his sales force.
Yeah.
Right. It's fascinating. So I started doing consulting, and now they're paying me gobs and gobs of money to come in and tell them what's wrong. And that was a lot of fun. I enjoyed doing that. Then they started paying me to train and retrain sales forces. So we went into a company in Minneapolis, for instance, and they were doing 75 million top line, losing $1 million a month. And they said, can you fix it? I said, sure. So they said, go ahead. Within 12 months, we turned it into $1 million a month loss to their most profitable division.
Yeah.
Well, now you've created a name for yourself in the direct to consumer space.
Yeah.
Doing basic stuff, by the way.
Not even rocket science. What business is this? This
was insurance.
This was insurance. Okay, so you're still in the insurance space, and
This
they're
is still in
losing
the
$1 million a month. How are they losing that much money?
You have to understand the difference between a corporate mindset and an entrepreneurial mindset.
Yeah.
If you've ever dealt in corporate America and you come up with an idea, it can take them 6 months to execute.
Oh, easily. Yeah.
So when I got there, they were spending enormous amounts of money on online advertising.
Mm-hmm.
And the ROI, the conversion and the ROI on that advertising was horrible. I mean, they were losing $5,000 on every policy they sold. There was no way to make money. And my first thing is to go to the marketing department, the chief marketing officer. And I told her, I said, you need to shut this thing down. I can get you better lead sources to sell your product to. Oh, we can't do that. It's part of our branding strategy. I'm like, well, that's a dumb branding strategy.
Yep.
So it took me literally probably 3 to 4 months in that instance, just to get them to shut that down, to allow me to take those marketing dollars and spend them in a different area that created a better ROI on the marketing dollars we spent, right? That we took all those losses and turned them into profits. And then you have to get into the sales process and all that kind of good stuff. But she ended up getting fired because she was hiding money in a slush fund, by the way.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah.
So really, I mean, you coming in and the big shift is, hey, you're spending all this marketing dollars here. This is not working. Let's take those marketing dollars and spend them here. And then you're getting more effective leads. And then it sounds like on the back end of that, you're probably doing a lot of training.
You retrain the sales force so that they understand what to do and when to do and how to do it. You put in proper tracking mechanisms so that we know what's going on.
Yeah.
I've always done, in every sales organization, we do what's called a bottom-up P&L. I'm getting kind of technical here, but most organizations look at a P&L, profit and loss statement, from revenue down.
Right.
And I go down to the bottom layer and I say, your organization drives revenue through salespeople. Each salesperson has an individual profit and loss statement based on their activity.
Yeah.
What's their OPEX percentage? What are they spending in their marketing cut? What's their variable cost? If you build a P&L at the bottom level, I can tell you every organization I've gone into, we end up firing 20% of the sales force.
Sure.
Because they're unprofitable.
Yeah.
And then we take the lead gen and we move it to the profitable people, and the revenue doesn't go down, but profit goes up because we've cut 20% of the overhead out. I mean, but you'd be amazed how many billion-dollar companies don't understand that concept.
Right. Yeah.
Because they're too corporate.
And the salespeople are making more money, companies making more money, everybody's happier. Yep.
Yes, everybody.
Yeah.
So
I've done some turnaround type of consulting stuff in my background as well. And coming in as a consultant it's hard, right? I think change management in general is hard. I think getting buy-in and consensus is hard. I think people get scared and they get nervous and they get defensive and all these different things that happen.
Of course.
How do you approach that? How do you overcome some of that?
You have to go in with kid gloves, right? You have to understand the human nature of people that are now scared of you. And then I don't communicate at that level of the organization, I communicate with the people who hired me on
Yeah.
what we found and the recommendations we make. I can tell you in that particular company was losing $1 million a month. The direct to consumer center was in another city. The first thing I said is you have to fire the entire management team
Yeah.
because they don't know what they're doing and they're part of the problem. But I didn't tell them that.
Yeah.
But when I first got there, I remember the head of that division made me walk around with a monitor all day and watch what I was doing, right?
Yeah.
Make sure I didn't say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing. And by the time I got back to Milwaukee, I was like, nah, they got to go.
They gotta go. Yeah. It's hard, man. It's the question thing is, one of the things that I think I learned the hard way is because I've gone into a few different companies where I mean, you know how it is. You can spend 5 minutes in a company and be like, oh, this is a freaking
Yep.
mess. If you
Yep.
just did this, and this better, uh, and early in my consulting career, I would do exactly that. It was like, I know better. I have this experience. We need to do these things. And then you start to alienate people and people get scared and people don't want to follow you. And then just little divisions. And what I've kind of developed into, and, I think made me more successful down the road. And I've been able to do some pretty amazing turnarounds in really difficult situations is that question approach where you don't necessarily come in as like, I have all the answers, but you
Right.
sort of come in and you get them to kind of tell you the answers. And
Right.
then and they're usually so clear, right? The
Like a good
employees,
therapist.
yeah, the employees know, they know
Yeah,
what's
of course
going
they do.
on. And then, when you get them to say it and you get them to tell you what needs to change, then when you make those changes, there's just so much more consensus across the organization.
I got to tell you, the last one I did, of course, I'm in a different position because I don't really care if you hire me or not,
Yeah.
And so they agreed to hire me to come in and do an assessment for 4 days. And I said, great, I got to interview the entire executive team. And then I'm going to go out through the organization and talk to managers and everybody else. And I'm getting paid either way at this point.
Yeah.
And I remember I walked into the guy and he was kind of the president of this division. And I said, all right, you want to know what the problem is? He goes, what? I said, you are the problem.
Yeah.
You scare people. Your management style is to throw grenades. Everybody's scared of you. They don't know who's in charge. Literally everybody in the organization thinks they report directly to you. Everybody, even though you have layers of management, they ignore the layers because they know that you're going to come in and override their boss anyway.
Yeah.
And I said, you're the problem. And he said, well, how do I fix it? I said, you got to go. He's like, what do you mean? He said, well, you fix it. And I said, I can fix it, but you have to leave. He goes, I'm not even allowed to come to the office. I said, you can keep your office in the back corner, but you make no decisions. You don't override me. You don't question anything I do. The only thing you can do is fire me.
Yeah.
And he said, okay.
Was he
And
the owner? Was he the owner of the company, or
he was the owner of the division? So he had
division?
started a company that he had sold to a public company, but he was still running
Yeah.
the acquisitional company.
Yeah.
And he agreed, and we tripled their revenue in 6 months,
Amazing.
lowered their costs, made them profitable. Yeah.
Yeah.
So in that case, I didn't care.
Have you, I mean, you're in a situation where, you've sold these companies. I'm assuming you're independent, wealthy at this time. You continue to coach. What kept you in the game?
When we sold the two companies in 06 and 08, I tried to retire, but I imagine I'm like every other entrepreneur out there is my mind doesn't stop. It won't let me. Every time I walk into a store, I think I could buy this. I could run this. I could make this more profitable. Every time I look at a business, that's just the way my brain works. So I tried, but I couldn't quit. So then I did the consulting, and then I tried to quit again and I couldn't. So I started another company, and then I started to write the books, and my brain just doesn't stop.
Yeah. Yeah. I get it. There's a lot of people out there. It's like, retire to do what? Like I'm already doing
Exactly
what I want to do,
Yeah. And to be honest with you, business to me is my hobby. It's fun. I don't golf. I don't hunt. I don't really care to watch sports that much. I do business. That's what I do.
So you own some restaurants too, right?
I did after I'd sold the companies in 08 or 09. And happy hour is my favorite thing to do with my employees. Is like, hey, work's over. Let's go have a drink. So we did that 3 or 4 times a week. And we're sitting in a bar one day and somebody goes, why don't you just buy a bar? I said, why don't you find one? And I will.
Yeah.
And the next day she says, the bar we were sitting at last night's for sale. And I said, buy it. So I bought a restaurant, and it was failing miserably.
Yeah.
So I did what was uh, common sense, is I bought 4 more
Sure.
and then got rid of the first one.
Yeah.
And then we've built this chain of restaurants over the years. And but the thing is, I don't know how to cook. I
Yeah.
don't know how to make drinks. I don't know anything about running a restaurant inside the 4 walls, but what I know how to do is run a business.
Yeah.
So I have good people that work for me that run it. And hence that's why I'm on day 32 skiing, right? Because I can run my entire restaurant chain off of my iPhone because I have apps and reports and everything that comes to me. I can stay at 30,000 feet and still operate my company.
Yeah. It's amazing, isn't it? So what are like, what's your core, what's keeping you busy right now then? I mean, you said you had the business, that you had the restaurants, you still do have those
Yeah,
or?
still doing. Yep, we're
Okay,
still growing.
good.
We'll end up franchising those probably, but I want somebody to come in and buy me out so they can go big.
Yeah. Are they all the same, restaurant?
I've got 2 different brands,
Two different
but
brands?
our main brand, which is called Central City Tavern, is the one we're expanding.
And they're
It's kind of
like,
an upscale sports tavern.
oh, love it. Sounds
Yeah,
fun. And those are all based out of where?
the Atlanta area.
Okay.
Yeah,
Very
and then
cool.
I got into real estate and I own a bunch of rental properties, commercial and residential. Real estate's an amazing investment, tax
Yeah,
wise, money wise, everything else.
sure.
What keeps me busy today is I've made the decision probably about 3 months ago that I've got 35 years of business experience in mergers, acquisitions, and
Yeah.
turnaround work and training sales forces. And I've done this for corporate America. I mean, there's a large insurance carrier right now that wants me to come in and retrain their sales force. I'm talking one, if I told you, you'd know
Know
who
it.
they are. I want to take all that experience and bring it down to the entrepreneur level,
Yeah.
right? There are companies from, I call it well-funded startups through 10 million in revenue
Mm-hmm.
that need help. And if you
Right.
look at the statistics, 6 million companies a year start up in this country. 70% of them will fail. That means 3.5 million people every single year are pouring their life savings and their blood, sweat, and tears into something, and they're going to fail. And I find that they fail for all the same reasons. And those reasons are all, they're soft skills. They're not hard skills, right?
Mm-hmm.
The example I use is, and I use this in my book, it's called Joe the Plumber, right?
Yeah.
Joe the Plumber works for a plumbing company. He starts his own business. He's now Joe the Plumber's plumbing business.
Sure.
If Joe fails in business, it's not going to be because Joe doesn't know how to be a plumber. It's because Joe doesn't know how to run a business.
Correct. Yeah.
It's the business end of the businesses where all these entrepreneurs are failing. And hence the book I wrote, The Dropout Multi-Millionaires, 37 business lessons, how to succeed in business with no money, no education, no clue, right? There are things that we can tell them if they will only check the ego, listen to us, and learn. That's why we started the mastermind group. Bring folks in and say, look, I can tell you what you're doing wrong. You can listen to me or not. Either way, you're going to pay me, but I'm telling you, I can tell you what you're going to do wrong. So I really enjoy working with entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs, businesses in that 0 to 10 million range.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're building out, this whole platform of sales training. And we call it tactical business advice and P&L analysis and building high performance sales teams and measured profitable growth, those kind of things.
Yeah. So you wrote the book, The Dropout Multimillionaire. That was written what, kind of in middle of COVID, 2021-ish?
Let's see, this is 23, 20. I started writing it in 21. It was my second book.
Yeah.
We published it last year.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we hit Wall Street Journal, USA Today bestsellers.
Yeah, great reviews. You go on Amazon, several hundred reviews.
Yep.
4.5, 4.7 stars, something like that. Lots of people say it's some of the best business books. It sounds like it's extremely pragmatic advice that's easy to understand. Kind of spoken from a guy that's been in the trenches, a real entrepreneur, not some McKinsey consultant who's doing it from an academic perspective.
This is stories, man. I'm telling you, every failure I've had, every success I've had, why I failed and why I succeeded. And that's, if you'll take those lessons, it'll help you flatten the learning curve.
Sure. So what are, what's kind of like the thesis? What are the areas, from a high level people are just failing at, people are bad at?
Sure. So let me break this down real quick. So we call this your personal filter, and this is the genesis of everything. Your personal filter, it can also be called critical thinking skills, but let's call it your personal filter. Your personal filter sits in your subconscious, and essentially every piece of information that comes at you every single day hits that personal filter, and that filter either accepts or rejects that information based on your entire history. And it's an ever evolving up to the minute filter, right? If you accept information, it becomes part of the filter. If you reject information, it becomes part of the filter, right? And it starts when you're a baby and your parents told you things and that formed the way you think. And then you went to school and your teachers told you things and that formed the way you think. By the way, your teachers came from their parents and their teachers.
Sure.
And then your friends peer pressured you to tell you things, which came from their parents and their teachers and their parents. And eventually you go through high school and college and you get a job and now your boss is doing it. And everything, every show you've ever watched, every book you've ever read, every piece of information you put in your brain creates this filter that accepts and rejects information, right? There's somebody listening to this podcast right now who thinks I'm full of crap because they're rejecting what I'm telling them. And somebody else is saying, I never thought of that. That's genius. That's now part of my filter. I understand, right? Now, here you go into business and you have zero success business history. You've never succeeded in business. Your filter doesn't know how to accept and reject information from a business perspective to help you make the right decisions. It doesn't know how. The first thing I tell people is, if you started a business, you don't know what you're doing. And you have to understand and accept that, right? The second thing you need to understand is, if you don't know what you're doing, you need to find somebody who does and let them help you. Right? So the example I always use is, Greg, have you ever met somebody, seems like everything they do works?
Sure.
Have you ever met somebody and you go, oh my God, everything that guy does fails. He can't win to save his life.
Yeah.
We all know these people. Yeah. You know, the only difference between me and you and Elon Musk, besides the couple $100 billion, the only difference is the way we think, right? That's the only difference. Like if you and I are driving from San Diego to LA and we're thinking, we got to worry about traffic. We got to worry about rush hour. We got to wait. How long is it going to take us? Elon Musk got stopped in traffic and he decided to build a tunnel to go underground and get there faster. That's the way he thinks. We can't think that way, right? The only difference between you and a successful person is the way you think. So if you've never succeeded in business, the first thing you need to understand is you don't know how. And the second thing you need to do is get somebody who does have that experience to help you avoid the mistakes that you are going to make so that you can accelerate your business, flatten the curve, and not lose as much money while you're figuring it out.
Yeah.
That's 1 and 2. That's the genesis of the whole book. And then it goes into all these stories about how that happened.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. We used to talk about ideas and ideas are great, but ideas are somewhat of a dime a dozen. The kind of an inside joke with some friends is, and I'm sure you get this all the time. People come to you and they're like, "Hey, Brian, I got this business idea and I'd love to talk to you about it. I'm going to send over an NDA, or something like that." And you're like, really? Like your business idea is so great that the second you tell me, I'm going to steal it and run it. Like ideas are a dime a dozen. It's execution, right? Like, and I would build on your point about Elon Musk. It's like, not only Elon Musk had the idea of building a tunnel, Elon Musk has the capacity and the know-how how to execute on actually building a company around that idea, right? So I'm I'm assuming that's where this starts to come into play, right? It's the not just the big idea, it's the tactical aspect of like you said, the bottom up P&L, like some of the considerations that you need to start to think about if you're going to really launch a company and be successful.
Execution. I used to joke, in 1981, I was a sophomore in high school and my buddy's dad worked for AT&T and he brought home this big computer thing.
Yeah.
And we had this game called Star Trek and it was these dots on a screen and it went deet, 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 and we have to reload the floppy. Sure. And I remember thinking, every home in America ought to have a computer.
Yeah.
I had that idea. You know what? I didn't execute. Michael Dell did, and everybody else. So execution is what it's about. Ideas mean nothing.
Yeah. I remember I was like 7 years old and I was like, Dad, why are telephones like you can only hear people's voice? Like, why can't you like have a screen where you could see somebody the other end of it,
right.
Like, FaceTime or something like that. And it's like, yeah, because it just hasn't been invented yet. Like, it's like, you don't have some amazing idea because like everybody has that. It's just, how do we get to a point where,
how many times have you ever heard, that was my idea. That was my idea. Totally. Yeah. Well, you can't execute.
Yeah. You can't execute. Yeah, no, that's really interesting. So what is, if we're going to start boiling this down into actual tactics, what are kind of the top things that you're talking about, like the most important lessons that, people who are thinking about being entrepreneurs need to keep in mind.
Yeah. So I got the top four slash top five. Number one, understand you don't know what you're doing. Number two, get a coach mentor.
Yeah.
Number three, you need to figure out, I call this the why. Why should anybody buy your product?
Yeah.
And this is critical. I had a call earlier with they call themselves a startup studio, not an accelerator and incubator. Why should somebody buy your product? He said, this is the biggest problem we have with people is I got a great product. Okay, but why should they buy it?
Right.
Right. If you're going to start a landscaping company, why do they buy it from you? Why? You're a dime a dozen. So whatever it is you're selling, you need to create something that's unique in the market.
Yeah.
You need to figure out why people should buy it from you and not someplace else. And then you need to be able to portray that to the public. So that's number three. You got to know why.
Yep.
Why should somebody buy that product from you? Number four, you need to know your numbers. Yeah. And so many people start businesses who are, like, most of them are specialists, right? I'm a programmer, I start a software company. I'm a plumber, I start a plumbing company. I'm an accountant, I start an accounting, whatever. You need to understand the numbers behind the P&L of your business if you're going to succeed long term.
Yeah.
There's so many entrepreneurs / business owners out there. And I acquire businesses, and occasionally, and 80% of the time I walk in and they're like, I say, your company's for sale. Great. Give me a 24 months P&L laid out month by month, side by side in an Excel spreadsheet. They're like, what are you talking about? We don't have that.
Yeah.
Like, how do you even know what you're doing?
Right.
If you don't know your numbers, how do you know what you're doing? You need to have critical metrics. You need to be able to track from a historical perspective and look at pattern recognition so that you can predict the future. So, and if you're not really, really good with numbers, get an accountant / bookkeeper, but figure out what the critical measures are within your P&L so that you can track those to see what's happening in your business. So those are the big four, right? Why the product, understand numbers, get somebody to help you understand what you're doing.
And yeah, and I agree. I mean, I think data especially is, it's just lacking. I think people get lazy. They don't have the systems in place. They're not tracking things. If they do, it's so far behind that, maybe they have a bookkeeper and, they're kind of doing numbers, but it's very difficult to make actionable decisions. But, I think the other thing I've seen a lot with entrepreneurs who are thinking of starting a company is they're overly optimistic with their numbers. Right?
Oh yeah.
It's
Hockey stick.
They think they make much more money than they're going to. They think that things are going to move much faster. And like the truest statement is it's going to cost you, twice as much and take twice as long than you think it is. So you better be prepared. You go into this entrepreneurial journey kind of with like the know-how that like, this is probably not going to be a rocket ship that's going to take off.
Right. I have the burrito story I tell people. This kid calls me and he says, I own the #1 burrito shop in North Georgia, and I'm going to build the next Chipotle. I've won awards. And I'm looking for investors. And would you sit down and talk to me? I said, absolutely. First thing you need to do is read my book, then set an appointment. Yeah. So he says, fine. He calls me back. We set an appointment, and he shows up to the appointment that day. I sit down. I said, how you doing? He goes, well, I almost didn't show up. I said, why? He goes, well, I read your book and I know the first thing you're going to ask me. I said, what is that? He goes, you're going to ask me for my numbers. Yeah. I said, yep. Do you have them? He goes, I don't really keep numbers. And I'm like, well, are you making money? And he's like, I don't know. I said, well, did you make money last year? He said, I don't know. I said, well, did you file a tax return? He goes, yes. I said, did you pay taxes? He said, no. I said, then you're not making money.
Yeah.
I said, you're telling me that you're going to build the next Chipotle and you're looking for investors, but you can't even give me a P&L? I said, dude, there's nothing I can tell you. There's no help I can give you. You need to go home and figure your numbers out.
Yeah.
There's just nothing I can do.
When you're coaching people, in your practice, when you come in and they brought in, what does an engagement look like? When you think about, and I guess the question I'm asking is for entrepreneurs out there, people who've had a little bit of success, but maybe have hit a wall, people who are looking and realize that somebody like yourself who has a wealth of experience, just coming in with fresh eyes in some ways, right? Being a little bit outside of the business and kind of looking from a different perspective than someone that's internal. What is the type of commitment from a time perspective they need to look into? Like what do the sessions look like? I mean, how do they engage with you?
Again, much like I just said, the very first thing I will ask you and the very first thing you need to provide me is a historical P&L,
Yeah.
right? Because we're going to break down 12 to 24 months of P&L. We're going to do what we call pattern recognition, which is every line item in your P&L. We're going to identify the critical metrics so that we know what percentages that everything needs to be at. And then we're going to track that from 24 months ago to today so that we can see what your business is doing. Is it are critical line items going up? Are critical line items going down? And I'm not talking about just revenue. Revenue can go up, but net profit can go down. Now you need to find why that is within the P&L. If we can break that down, then I can get a mental, I think about it like as a puzzle, right? I think in my head, I'm building a puzzle of your business. And much like a puzzle, if there's a piece out of that isn't fitting or it's gone, that's where we need to focus. What happened here? What happened there? So if we can build that historical P&L, we can look at the pattern recognition, then we can figure out where your business was, where it is, and then I can tell you where it's going, because pattern recognition is patterns, right? If this percentage is going down, it's going to continue to go down unless something changes. And so if we have negative metrics, we need to change what we're doing. If we have positive metrics, we need to reinforce those. So the very first thing we do is look at the P&L. I don't care about the business. I've had people say, come look at my restaurant. I said, I don't need to look at it. Send me a P&L.
Right.
I can tell you what's going on inside that business. Once we identify the challenges or the opportunities, then we start focusing on those specific areas. But until you do that, I mean, anything I tell you could be just a guess. So first we have to do the analysis, and it all starts with that P&L.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective. I haven't quite thought of it that way, but it's like, come look at my business. We have the best, whatever sub sandwiches there are. We're the best burritos there are. Look how good we use the freshest avocados in our, guacamole or whatever it might be. And it's like, you look at McDonald's, right? If you just went into a McDonald's, you'd be like, these aren't the best burgers. They're kind of dry. Like, it's like, this isn't the kind of way I would want to eat. But it's like, that's not what McDonald's is about. You look at if you were going to look at McDonald's purely on a numbers perspective, you're like, dude, these guys crush it. This is efficiency. This is profitability. They got real estate assets and I think to your point, a lot of people get so focused on the practical aspect of the business but if you had my burritos, that they lose track of, like, well, you're running a business here, right? And business is all about, essentially making money. So you're not doing any of that. Your unit economics are all fouled up, like how I don't care how good your burritos are. If you continue on this trajectory doing these things, you're just eventually going to fail. It's just a matter of how much money you're going to lose before you get there, right?
I bought a restaurant 10 years ago, and I remember they were the largest. They sold more wings than any other restaurant in town. This is a simple example, right? And so we buy it and we dig into it, and they were doing 25-cent wings. Well, when I broke down the analysis, we were spending 27 cents on the wing.
Yeah.
By the time you figure the cost of the wing and the cooking and the OpEx and everything else, I'm like, we have to raise the prices on wings. And they said, we'll sell less wings then. I'm like, then we'll lose less money. They're not thinking about it like that, right? Even in McDonald's, if you break down the individual analytics on all that, and you say, we're at a 20% profit margin, but our hamburgers are a little dry. Now I can make a tactical decision to change the meat patties based on the fact that my profit might go from 20 to 19, but my revenue might go from $1 billion to $1.5 billion because I have a better product. But unless you know the monetary metrics within everything that you're doing, your decisions are a guess. You need to make those decisions based on all this data, which most big companies do, quite frankly, right? But you don't want to charge 25 cents for a 27-cent wing. I mean, it's that simple.
Yep. No, it makes sense. So right now, are you taking on new clients? Are you actively,
so the Force Multiplier Mastermind, right? That's the name of the new company. And it's the Force Multiplier is the use of tools or people to amplify or magnify your business without requiring more work out of the owner, right? It's the Force Multiplier. We work on tactical business strategies. We work on historical P&L analysis. We work on building high performance sales teams. That's what we do. So this is a brand new company. It's in the building stage. The websites are being built, all the content, the training courses. And we're going to launch with 10 people, probably late April, to bring them in. We're going to do one-on-ones monthly with them. We're going to do a Facebook page group that they can have their own, private area to bounce ideas off of everybody with. We're going to do quarterly one-on-one face-to-face meetings with the whole group in Atlanta. So we're going to be bringing 10 people in. I've already got 2, so I'm looking for 8 more. I'm not really pushing it right now because I don't have the content all done, but
Yeah.
it will be shortly.
Great. So they're almost like little pods or little groups that you're bringing in, kind of like a
This will be,
cohort of
yep, this
sorts.
will be the inaugural class of the Force Multiplier Mastermind. Yeah.
Interesting, interesting. So when do you expect all that to be publicly available?
Literally,
Website.
probably,
Yeah.
yeah. The website is under build. If you ever built a website, you know how difficult and that can be. Yeah, it'll take us 3 weeks, and 3 months later, you're like, what happened to
Yeah.
3 weeks?
There's
So they're telling me 3 to 4 weeks more on
sure.
the website. So
So
Facebook
6 weeks
page
from
just went up
now.
today. So
Yeah.
yeah, so I'm talking probably late April is my guess, maybe early May. We'll
Sure.
be in full launch.
Sure. How much longer you got in Park City for?
I go home Saturday. So
Okay.
I did 28 days here, did 5 days in Vail,
Nice.
and now I'm headed home.
Amazing. Living the dream.
Yeah, well, chasing life's passions, man, doing everything everybody says they're going to do, but they never actually do.
Yeah. Dropout multimillionaire. Who's it for? Is it for people who are already started down a journey, or is it for people who are thinking about getting off the ground, or
Uh,
both?
the market is this: 500,000 people a month start a business.
Yeah.
70% of them will fail.
Yeah.
That's the market we're going after. The mastermind is for people from well-funded startups. They're already rolling. But if you're thinking of starting a business, or you've got a business and it's not growing like you want, or if you've got a business and it's not profitable like you want, first understand the problem is you, then
Yeah.
read the book, then get a coach, and that's how you accelerate.
I love it. I think that's a really good place to wrap up. Uh, Brian, appreciate it, man. It was good speaking with you. I feel like we could we could talk for hours more and go into many of these stories, but I think that's one of the beauties of the
We
book.
didn't even talk about sports today, Greg.
We didn't even talk about sports. No, no. You're half Ironman, which is an impressive feat. I know you were a pole vaulter in high school.
You know what I like about athletes? Athletes learn how to push themselves beyond what they think they can do. And when their
Right.
body's telling them no, they still go forward. And that
Yeah.
same principle applies to business.
Yeah.
In business, sometimes you have to push yourself beyond what you think you can do. And when the whole world's telling you no, you still got to move forward because you got a goal there at the end that you got to get to. So that's my tie in.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I talked to Paige Lawrence a couple days ago. She's an Olympian. She was in the 2014 Olympics. She was part of a pair of figure skating team, and she's gone on and she's become a successful entrepreneur in her own right. And she has a consulting practice, and her whole point of view is around coachability. One of the
Mm-hmm.
things, the first things that we talked about is just the simple fact that like you only become elite when you're willing to take guidance from other people and put the work in. And
Yep.
I think there's just such an application to that's relevant to entrepreneurs in general is the same qualities and traits and habits and all those different types of things that you find in elite athletes. And I think the one commonality, and there's a lot of them, but the one commonality is coaching. The willingness to work with people to help you get to your goals.
You said it earlier. Tom Brady has a coach.
That's
Tiger
right.
Woods has a coach. What in the world makes you think as an entrepreneur you don't need one?
That's right. All right, man. Great speaking with you. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Greg. Appreciate it.